Welcome, wonderful world, to episode 2 of The World Begins With You, which is a podcast about travelers and their favorite destinations and favorite experiences and moments abroad. As well as this, the podcast also offers their favorite and best practical tips and tricks to their great adventures. And today, I am your host, Jules, and I am joined by the awesome travel photographer, Mr. Jim Jones. So, can you please introduce yourself?
Hi, Jules. Thanks for having me on the podcast, and I'm always honored when finds my photography interesting. So thanks for the kind words. So I am Jim Jones. I live in the Chicago, Illinois suburbs in the good old United States. I am a travel photographer and frequent traveler, both for business and for pleasure. I have a full-time job that pays the bills, but travel and travel photography is really, really what drives my passion. And I write a blog at travelstoriesandimages.com, inspiring people to go places, take photos, and tell stories.
Yeah, and his travel photography is very interesting because he's been to, I feel, really exotic sort of countries, places such as Africa, and you've been on a few cruises and you've been to a lot of countries from memory, right?
Yeah, I have. We've been on an awful lot of cruises, so we take a nice vacation every year. We've been married 27 years, and I believe 24 of them have been cruises. So that's part of the reason I've been fortunate to be to so many countries. You go to a cruise and you see like 7 countries in 2 weeks or whatever. So yeah, but then
Yeah.
I've done a lot of personal travel, and then, like I said, also business, kind of internationally, and then have worked in a day or two of just travel and relaxation to have some fun in another country.
Yeah, and I think that's really good. I think you can give really excellent tips and tricks to the business travel folks.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I know a lot of them that actually really don't to like to travel abroad during their business trips, and I think it's a bit of a shame. I mean, I do understand that they are busy because a business trip is a business trip, but definitely when I've been meeting other guests of the podcast who also go on business trips, they also make a very active effort in order to travel to these places as a tourist as well as on business. So I think that's very important to really indulge or really learn about the new culture that you're in, even if it's because of business. Because
Yeah.
I definitely think you learn something new.
And I found that there was a side benefit that in say Japan. I've been to Japan a lot for business, and I always tried to schedule it so that I would leave. I would get there on a Friday, and then I have the weekend before I started business on Monday. I always
Yeah.
find when I can talk about the culture or talk about things that are happening or current events, it allows me to relate better to my coworkers and customers. So I mean, maybe that's a little bit of rationalization, but I feel like really it does help me be a better rounded person and understand the culture and the people that I'm dealing with.
Yeah, and I definitely think that's very important in terms of business communication.
Yeah.
Yeah, you definitely I've read so many articles or I've heard so many stories about because I used to be English teacher in Japan and
Mhm.
I would teach business people and there's stories about how the misconceptions between cross cultures can happen is sometimes a little funny, sometimes pretty amazing, and it is definitely really important to understand the context of the culture that you're dealing with in business in order to have better business relations. So
Yeah.
that's a very good tip and trick. So first off, what was the moment that made you realize that you really wanted to travel and that you really wanted to do it as leisure as well as for business?
So I actually don't recall a time where I didn't want to travel. My mom had a lot of friends from other countries around the world because of a large chemical company near where we lived drew engineers from all over the world, and so I had good friends of my mom who were from mainland China, who were from Denmark, Holland, France, Italy, Japan, all over the world. And
Wow.
I was insanely curious to learn about their cultures and, and all that kind of stuff. And it just made me want to go see and experience life there. And
That is,
we took a lot of driving trips when I was a kid. Also,
yeah.
I've been to all 50 U.S. states, and probably 44, 45 of those I saw before the age of 18.
Oh, wow. So you
Yeah,
guys really did like
yeah,
road trip a lot.
absolutely. So it's just the going someplace, seeing something new and different and interesting, and I really learned to love it.
Yeah, that is really cool. I did not know that you went to like 45 states before you're 18. I haven't even been to like all the states in Sydney, of Australia, which is which is my country of origin or
Yeah.
well, birth.
Well, and
But
Australia is a little bit bigger. You have a little bit more of a task, like a lot of travel to go. So
yeah, I
yeah.
think I knew someone who road tripped from Sydney to Perth, which is literally uh across Australia, and I
Hmm.
think it took him, I think, 24 hours, somewhere around along that line, but they did not stop. Like, he was with a group of friends, and they didn't stop to sleep or anything like
Oh
that. Like, it was,
wow.
yeah, it's pretty crazy. I'm not gonna do that ever. But out of all the cultures that you came across, what was the culture that you're most fascinated by? The one that you really wanted to go to first?
Well, so I see a theme emerging here already because we talked about Japan before.
Yeah.
Ever since I was a kid, I grew up watching Japanese science fiction. I was fascinated with the culture. Japan is it's this unique mix of ancient and ritualistic and all that, but also very high cutting edge technology. There's not a serious professional or travel or portrait photographer that doesn't use a camera that's made in Japan. Just
Yeah,
for an example,
that's true.
but I was always fascinated with it, and then in 1996, I got the opportunity to move there for 3 months for a work project, and
Oh.
I literally, my wife and I had been married about 5 years at the time. I literally told the boss yes, and I came home like, yeah. So here's the deal. I'm going to Japan. Nice to see but it was so great. I lived in the middle of Tokyo, near where all the sumo wrestling happens, which was kind of cool. But I learned a little bit of the language. I experienced the culture, the food, and all that, and then I was fortunate enough to several years later, for a period of about 5 or 6 years, go back once a year. But I
Um,
always try to bake in some time to spend there just as a tourist, and I'm fascinated, like I said, by the sense of ancient history and culture, the cutting edge technology, and kind of the symbiotic relationship between the Japanese people and nature.
yeah.
Their gardens, their floral designs and stuff like that. It just, man, it just, even just thinking about it now, it just lights up my soul to think about the culture.
Yeah, I mean, I went to Japan straight after I graduated from university, and it it was my first full-time job to be in Japan as an English teacher, and I feel as though whether I liked it or not, Japan plays a huge part in my actual personality and the way that I view things. I mean, I didn't like seafood before I went to
Hmm.
Japan, but now it's definitely one of the things that I really like to eat. And I found that nature started to play a very important part of my life, and it's really amazing how Japan definitely changes your point of view, and and they or Japan is such a contrasting society because, as you said before, they are so technological, but at the same time, they really believe in minimalism and respecting their nature. So it,
Absolutely.
yeah, it's definitely, even though uh, I wouldn't want to live there again, but I definitely want to travel back there again. Have you actually been to Kansai, which is like Canton? Yeah.
No, I haven't. So I've been mostly in Tokyo, and then like a couple days in Osaka, a couple days down in Kyoto.
Mhm.
Kyoto, it like everybody that wants to go to Japan wants to go to Tokyo. Kyoto is definitely something to not be missed. I mean, if you like that ancient, and I'm sure you know, but if you like that ancient historical perspective and all that, wow, Kyoto is just an amazing city. I loved it.
Yeah, I know. I lived in Japan for 3 years, but I've never been to Osaka and Kyoto.
Mm,
And yeah, but honestly, that was actually the number one place that I really wanted to go to when I went to Japan, but I could just never find the opportunity, and that's kind of the only reason why I want to go back to Japan, just so that I can go to Osaka and Kyoto, because yeah, I know that those cities are amazing, not only in history, but also in the food.
yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah, you're very lucky that you got to go to the country that you wanted to visit to the most. Would you say that was your favorite city, somewhere in Japan, or you have a
Uh,
couple of others that I know of?
the favorite city in the world, I think, is the question you're asking.
Yeah.
Well, so okay, so I'm going to say I'm biased, but of all the places I've been to, Chicago is absolutely my most favorite city in the whole world.
Yeah.
I grew up maybe we'll call it a 3 hour drive from here, and I always wanted to live in the area. I love the food, the people, the culture, and all that. And I moved up here to go to university. I'll just say a really long time ago, and because I'm old. But it felt so much like home, and Chicago, it's got great culture, great nightlife, great sports teams, world class food, and the other thing that I like from just a living and travel perspective, um, there's two major airports in Chicago. You're within literally 80% of the population of the world in one flight from Chicago. So
Oh,
it just makes it so much easier to get to. I mean, I could fly to anywhere in South America, just about anywhere in Africa, mainland China, Japan, all that kind of stuff. So now to Australia, it's two flights, unfortunately,
yeah.
but it just opens up a world of possibilities. Bless you. In terms
Sorry.
of no, no, that's fine. In terms of travel and all that. Um,
Um,
that said, I mentioned Tokyo a lot. I won't belabor the point, but that's kind of my number two. And
mm,
then number three, kind of my I have a real soft spot in my heart for Paris. I just it's such a romantic city, so beautiful. The food is that's probably the best food town in the world that I've been to. Um, yeah,
oh,
I mean,
yeah.
it's everybody's got their opinions, right? But
Yeah, but it's
I
your podcast.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And things that just ordinary, very simple fare, they just taste so much better, and of course the wines and all that kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
and I think the key to those being my three favorite cities is I feel so incredibly comfortable in all three of them. I don't know a ton of the language, but my English is pretty good. But I speak I speak a little bit of French, just enough to know to ask for directions and all, and the same in Japanese. And I think that anytime you can learn, even if it's just a please and a thank you, in the other culture, I think you have just this relationship that you don't have if you try to go in, solely with your native language.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, when I was an English teacher, I think one of the parts that I least liked about it was the fact that I couldn't wholly communicate with my students. I mean, it wasn't much of a problem with the adult students because obviously the adult students had more uh, language and English to them, but especially the children, you know, they'd be crying. And the thing is, they were really strict that I wasn't allowed to talk Japanese to them. So yeah,
Yeah.
and they're just crying and they want to pour their heart out, and I just want to like comfort them, but I really can't because I cannot speak their language. And I know that some people, they do find it difficult to learn a language, and especially with Japanese, yes, it is extremely difficult, but
Yeah.
yeah, just trying to, it makes a world of difference, and the Japanese people really do appreciate it. And I think it really depends also where you're staying. I mean, main city Tokyo, they can be a little ruthless, but like in places like Yokohama, the partial outskirts of Tokyo, which are still really interesting to go to, you know, you can speak in English and they're really nice and they'll really try to help out. So I definitely agree with you in that kind of stuff. But when it comes to Paris and Tokyo, what were your favorite destinations in those places in particular?
Oh gosh. In Tokyo, well, so two things that popped to mind in Tokyo is the Meiji Shrine and Gardens. It's this huge, and you probably know, but it's this huge garden and a temple. It's in the area called Shinjuku, and
Mm.
I have a post about that on my blog, and I'll send you the link for the show notes for those who are interested. But
Mm.
it's just it's like the traffic is just crazy, and it's like 24/7. It's a big shopping area and all that kind of stuff. And literally, you walk in the gardens, and there's all these bamboo trees and large pine trees and all that. It's like you can't even hear the city, and people just walk through. They're very quiet, very respectful, very introspective, and all that. And it's just this such an oasis of calm in the middle of a crazy city.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of the ancient part of Japan and the history and all that. And then the other area that I love in Tokyo is called Akihabara. It's the electro. You laugh, you know what I'm saying. But Akihabara, for those that don't know, it's Japanese. It literally means electronic city, but
Yeah.
it's where all of the electronic stores are, all the software companies and all that. Like if you need something that's powered by a battery or plugs into a wall and you can't find it there, you don't need it. And it's I mean it's like neon and people like shouting all this stuff, and it's crazy, and oh man, but it's so fun to be around. It's just a great cultural experience. So um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Mm.
and then and you asked about Paris, just briefly. We stayed there a couple times, and we stay in this area right near where the Louvre is. The place where we stay is about a half a kilometer from the Ritz in Paris,
Yeah.
and it's this quiet little kind of side street, but you're right on the Champs Elysees. So the opposite end. So one end of the Champs Elysees is the Arc de Triomphe. The other end is what's called the Place de la Concorde, and we're
Oh,
right near the Place de la Concorde. But you walk down the Champs Elysees and you see the shops and the restaurants and stuff like that. So yeah,
oh,
that's my favorite place there.
that's so lovely. That's
Yeah,
so luxurious.
yeah, yeah,
This place. But it's really cool to hear your perspective, because as if the viewers can't tell yet, I mean, we do have quite an age difference, but and during my, like, personally for my generation, they know Akihabara as the place for anime and pop culture, and
right.
like,
Yeah,
yeah, and it's a little funny, like it's a bit too out of control about how we know that Akihabara is the mecca for anyone that loves anime, anyone that loves games. But I do know that amongst the older generation, Akihabara is a favorite for electronics. And it's really cool that you mentioned that as well, because I just feel as though there's kind of a disconnect between our generations. But Akihabara as a city, like at first I wasn't really impressed because it's known as anime's sort of Sin City.
Sure,
in my
yeah, yeah.
It is. It's pretty bad. Some of the things that I've seen there, but also what you've said is very true. That it is electronic city. Like the biggest Yodobashi, which is an electrical appliance store,
Hmm.
is located in Akihabara. It's right next to the station. It is humongous. It is like arena sized. I'm not joking.
Yeah.
Have you seen it?
Yeah, I think I've seen the one you're talking about, and what just amazed me is you walk in and like there's an entire floor for vacuum sweepers or for Hoovers. Like
Yeah.
I I didn't know that there were that many, and something like computers or cameras, I could understand that, but like
Mm.
there's a whole floor of rice cookers, there's a whole floor of humidifier. It's just like it's crazy, but I just I love it. I never cease to be amazed by being there. And at the time when I was going back and forth, I was like super into video games, particularly arcade games,
Ah,
and so there was a lot of places there to play them,
yeah,
and I would
that's true.
and that's if you wanted to see the top world class games, that's where you would go. So I'm
Yeah,
trying to silence the phone.
that's all right. Yeah, no, I 100% agree. I laugh because whenever my friends came to Japan, our number one favorite destination to go to was Akihabara because Tokyo is amazing. Like, for example, I'm not gonna lie, Shinjuku, Shibuya, Harajuku are all big hotspots for if you want to have a good time out, go out, party, and it's like the best type of uh, luxurious party night out. But me and my friends, if we didn't want to do that, we just end up going to Akihabara because Akihabara has a lot of cheap and interesting options. Like I remember I spent like 1 or 2 days in Akihabara with my friends just playing in the arcades because they have so many. Or there's the all night karaoke, and
Hmm.
in yeah, and there's actually a lot of choices to choose from in Akihabara. So if you don't want to do one thing, like if you're sick of the anime, then you can look at the electronics section. I also know that their secondhand electronics scene is amazing, really cheap, also
Mm.
really good quality. Yeah, and they also have like a lot of antique sort of goods in Akihabara, but also in Paris, you said that the foodie scene is amazing and delicious, right?
It is. It's great. I love it, and just the small sidewalk cafes. I've told several people this, but here in the U.S. like if you're going to go out to eat, it's the husband and wife and a couple kids and maybe meet some friends, and you go, you sit down, you get starters, you just eat, and then you get your main meal and just eat, and then you get dessert or coffee, and then you just go home. You go to Paris or you go to someplace in Spain or a lot of places in Europe, and it's like, you have an aperitif, and then you talk for a while, and then you might have a starter, and then you talk for a while, and um, the food is like an enhancer to the conversation and to the experience and all that, and they just all kind of go together. And I love the sidewalk cafe culture. It's just something that we unfortunately don't have here in the same way, and I love the fact that they do it.
I mean, does Chicago have a lot of cafes or a lot of popular cafes, or it's not really like that?
I mean, it does, and there's times where you will see that, like particularly on the weekends or like on a Sunday brunch or whatever.
Mm.
I think it's more in pockets and certain areas. versus, particularly in Paris, it's more like more like a way of life. And
Yeah.
even for the most part, even when it's like the coldest in Paris, it's not that bad. Now you contrast that with Chicago in January, when we had what we call the polar vortex, some unusually cold conditions, and it was -40 Fahrenheit. I don't even know what that is in Celsius, but I'm like that. But even so, Chicago is colder in the winter and all that, and you just don't have that culture like you do in some of the other European cities.
And I mean, I do like, because when I went to Paris, I was a teenager and I was a little snotty nosed teenager. But now that I look back on it, just there's something about the atmosphere that is not only historic but definitely luxurious and easygoing, and it's just really amazing. I mean, to me, my favorite part of Paris was the Louvre because I am a massive art fan. But just walking
Mm,
around Paris, uh, I remember my mom saying, "Oh, just look at the people just sitting around and talking and just really enjoying themselves." And I didn't really think about that until I was older and like around this age. I mean, they do look really nice and relaxed, and they seem to really enjoy each other's company when they're eating out.
yeah, very much so, and that's what I try to achieve in my life, is just to have that balance of, you work crazy hard, but then you have friends and you have family and you engage with them and you do life with each other and all that kind of stuff. And that's the big thing that I picked up. A lot of almost every place in Europe I've traveled. I've been to Greece, I've been to France, I've been to Germany, Switzerland, Austria, and there's just that element of, we're going to come together and just do life and celebrate each other's presences, which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah, it's definitely really nice. It like, even though Paris is really crowded, it doesn't feel as fast paced as Sydney City, for example. But it's still, and yeah, I think just the difference in culture is really fascinating.
Yeah.
Um, Yeah, but in terms of favorite food, would you say that Paris has your favorite food, or what would you consider your most memorable or favorite food during your travels?
Yeah. So in terms of favorite food, just taking the travel or including travel and home life, if I could live on one type of food for the rest of my life, it definitely would be pizza. But I love Italian food, and so we took a trip several years. I think it was about 10 years ago, and we spent a couple days in Venice. Um, Despite how much I love Paris and the food, and it's a great food town, I really really love Italian food. It's my favorite type of cultural cuisine of all. And I just like I loved everything that we had in Venice, and I've been to a couple other places in Italy as well, and I fell in love with it. Yeah.
Wow, because yeah, like, because when I went to Italy, I went to a few places. From memory, I went to Rome and the Vatican and Venice. Venice is actually my favorite city of all time. It's so
Oh
beautiful.
wow. Okay. Yeah, it is.
Yeah, there's just, I really feel as though it's sort of like an alternate universe because they don't use cars, they don't use trains. Their only form of public transport is boat, walking, and bicycle. And to me, it's just so beautiful. But
Yeah.
yeah, when I went to Venice, when I went to Italy, I was a little underwhelmed with the food. And the same thing happened with New York. It's so unfortunate. I hear actually a lot of the guests that you guys will hear in the podcast. They really love Italian food, but I was unfortunately so underwhelmed. But
Oh wow.
I really like Italian coffee. I think Italian
Yes.
coffee is amazing. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like
Yeah.
it's like a nice smooth punch to my face. Like it's so strong, but
Yes.
it's yeah.
But it's bold and it's robust and it just has like such great flavor
Yeah.
note to it. So let
Yeah.
me just something else about food. I know several people that when they travel. Well, my parents used to be like this when they traveled a lot after retirement, but they would go to like some European country and they would look for the McDonald's and as much as possible, I try to indulge in the cuisine of the culture that I'm in. When we went so for our 25th anniversary a couple years ago, we went to Kenya and Tanzania,
yeah.
and tried to eat the local cuisine there. I try to eat. I'm not a big seafood eater. I actually don't care for it that much. But in Japan, I had some wonderful sushi
Yeah.
and some shrimp dishes. Chicago, we clearly have the best pizza in the known universe. But when I go to New York, I'll eat the New York pizza, and it's like, whatever. Um, just so I to me, food and culture and language are all so interrelated. It's
Yeah.
so hard to pull them apart. And I feel
Yeah.
like experiencing the food in another country is just another aspect on their culture. So now,
Yeah.
if I'm gone for a couple weeks, if I'm in France or Germany or whatever, if I'm gone for a couple weeks, I'm not above going to have a McDonald's, once during the trip. Like I got to have that taste of home.
Yeah.
But I do try to experiment with the food and all that kind of stuff. So
Yeah, I mean, experimenting with food is definitely very important. But before I get into that topic, what
yeah.
do you recommend in Italy in terms of food? Because I hear so many of the guests talking about how much they love Italian food. And honestly, I would love to have that same experience. So, what would you recommend in terms of Italian food?
Well, so there's a couple things. In at least a lot of the Italian restaurants in the United States, you go and order pasta, and you have like a large plate of pasta, and that's your main dish. Whereas in Italian culture, as I understand it, that's sort of like the second starter. Like you have the antipasti, the cured meats or pickled vegetables or whatever, and then you have like a small plate of pasta, and then you have your main course, which might be fresh fish or beef or a chicken or something like that. um, I I would say that there's different specialties in different regions. Know what the specialties are in that region and try to stick with it. Like I think more there's a dish I just love. It's called ossobuco. It's veal shank. That's sorry, I'm just thinking about having it now. But it's veal shank that's been cooked in the oven, usually served with polenta on the side. I think that's that, as I understand it. I could be wrong, but it's more of like a northern Italian type thing. And then you get down to southern Italy, it's more grains and fishes and stuff like that. And the other thing is, absolutely do not miss the chance if you drink to pair a great Italian wine with your food. I don't
Yeah.
know a ton about wine, but I've experimented with food and wine pairings, and it's man, you put the two together, and it's fantastic.
Yeah, oh my goodness. I would definitely like to try Italian wine. I've heard amazing things about it.
Yeah, yeah.
But in Venice, what did you enjoy eating there?
So believe it or not, the thing that I enjoyed eating most was a dish of ice cream and an espresso that cost me about $20 for the two of us. So, but but
Yes.
but here's
Yeah.
why. As a kid watching movies about Europe and all that, I was always fascinated with this area that's kind of in the center-ish part of Venice. It's called the Piazza San Marco, the Plaza of Saint Mark. And
Mm,
it's it's the like you see it in all the movies and like the pigeons flapping around and there's a big
yeah.
church and all that and I was like we're gonna sit here. And the guy's like, you got to order something. So, and by the way, when you're in Venice, sitting around Piazza San Marco, if there is a band playing anywhere within like 100 meters, literally all the restaurants double the price of the food. I'm not kidding. So,
Oh,
and there was a band playing, like, two trumpets and whatever, and it
oh.
was raining cats and dogs. It was like, it was horrible weather. So we're sitting there like eating our ice cream, sipping our espresso. I was so unbelievably happy because I'm like, I am at a place that I've always pictured seeing my entire life. And so,
Wow.
yeah. Now that said, just a regular sit down meal. We had an this is going to sound so cheesy. We had an unbelievable Neapolitan style pizza. It just cheese and crushed tomato, not even a tomato sauce.
Oh,
Neapolitan is a super thin crust. They bake it in a really hot oven for like
mm.
6 to 8 minutes, so the dough kind of fluffs up and all that, but it's super crunchy. And it was man, it was so fresh, and it was so good. And the basil that they put on after the cooking and a little bit of olive oil, it just, everything
Ah,
was so fresh. It's like nothing I was used to from here. So
sorry. Hello. Yeah.
no, yeah, yeah, we're back.
I but yeah, that, you know what? I think that is partly my fault because now that you've mentioned it, I had pasta in Italy, but I did not have pizza in Italy, and I think that was my grave mistake.
Yeah, yeah, and seriously, any place you go, and when we first talked, we talked a little about the food in New York and Tokyo
Yeah,
and all that, and honestly, to find the best food, you just ask the locals.
yeah,
That's like, we stayed at a like a bed and breakfast in Venice, and I was like, where do we go? And they're like, oh, this little pasta place, and like it was like 4 tables. I mean, it's like an incredibly small restaurant,
yeah.
but it was, kind of an open air thing, and that's where we had that great pizza, and of course gelato afterwards. So yeah, so it was good.
Yeah, I definitely have to remember that because I like, now that you mentioned that espresso and ice cream, I also had that in Italy and that was amazing. I think that's why I like Italian coffee a lot. But I mean, in terms of food, it is always important to definitely like try new things, but also like stick with the old things because sometimes you do miss like home food when you travel, right?
Sure. Yep. Absolutely. And it's and I said something about my parents, and finding the McDonald's in every country that they went to. I mean, look, that's what was comfortable for them. And there's traveling is a fine balance between pushing yourself out of your comfort zone, but also not so far out of your comfort zone that you're completely uncomfortable and don't have a good time. So if you know what, if you love McDonald's and you want to see what McDonald's tastes like in Japan versus what it tastes like, here, great, go for it. It's what you as the traveler feel comfortable with and what you feel inspired to do. And I just know trying the local stuff is what always works well for me.
Yeah. And honestly, it's actually really interesting if you try Macca's, like, or if you try McDonald's in like various parts of the world, because each each area has their specialties, has something that's like a little different. Like, it's a little strange because even the fast food franchises have a little reflection of the country themselves. Like, in Australia, we don't exactly have Macca's specials. So, for example, in Japan, every sort of season or every month, they actually had a special burger that corresponded, or they just had like a different flavored burger every month. And I
Yep.
didn't try all of them,
Yeah.
but yeah, it was really interesting because some of them is like a teriyaki burger. Another one is I can't really. Oh, I think they have a shrimp burger, which I would never see in Australia. It's
Yeah.
definitely really interesting, but also it is important that to go out of your comfort zone, but realize that there are some things that you will like and that you won't like, no matter how open-minded you are while you're traveling.
Yeah.
Because Yeah, I mean, do you know matcha tea in Japan?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, some other people really like it, and I like the flavor as a dessert, but I don't actually like the tea itself unless it is really high quality, which can be slightly expensive. But in general, even though I lived in Japan for 3 years, it took me a long time to get used to the flavor, which is a very standard sort of Japanese flavor. And there's also mugicha, which is wheat tea, and I just don't like it, and I
Mm.
don't care. Yeah, and like I've tried it many times, of course. Like I really tried to indulge in the culture of Japan, but at the end of the day, you are who you are, and there are some things that you won't like. There are some things that you will like. Like, luckily, when I was in Japan, I got a tolerance for matcha tea, but still, I do not like wheat tea. Even many years of staying there, so just like there are things that you have to realize when you're traveling, that there are some things that you will accept, there are some things that you won't accept, but of course try your best just to be open-minded to their culture in general, right?
Exactly. Be realistic about your limits, and don't do things because you feel like you have to.
Yeah, most definitely. And in terms of doing things because you have to and the sort of stereotypes in different countries, do you think that you had a moment that shattered your travel stereotypes?
Um, I think probably the most memorable one was in New York City. So I was going out for a business trip. I got a cheap airfare to fly in the Saturday night before, and Sunday I was staying kind of in the I like the lower third of Manhattan, roughly near Grand Central Station, and I decided I wanted to walk all the way down to Battery Park, which is at the south part. That's kind of where you go to see the Statue of Liberty. I wanted to see Wall Street and all that kind of stuff. I took a map and a cup of coffee. Every New Yorker that I stopped, every person that I asked for directions or about a restaurant or whatever, they were so helpful. They were so nice. Like they were proud of their city, and
Yeah.
they were never too busy to be stopped. Well, granted it was a Sunday morning, but they were never too busy to be stopped and asked for directions or for assistance or whatever. So I always have this belief that the energy you give out is what you give back. So
Yeah.
if I'm looking for the best hot dog in Brooklyn that's within 2 blocks of the Brooklyn Bridge, and I ask somebody, if I approach it in a spirit of hey, I'm curious and you're doing me a favor and all that kind of stuff, then I think you sort of get that back. But yeah,
Yeah.
the I guess the cultural stereotype that blew up for me that day was New Yorkers are not rude like everybody says they are.
Yeah, it's really amazing. And it's kind of funny because I have talked about this topic to quite a lot of our other guests on the podcast, and there's definitely mixed reactions. But I am definitely on the New Yorkers are not so mean side of things.
Right.
But yeah, but I think it is. I think a large part of that is because I am born and raised in Sydney, Australia, and I do live and I was raised in the suburbs of Sydney, but in general, I think Sydney people are a little short tempered. They are very short tempered and they are really short on time. I also think it really depends on the places that you're visiting within that city. I think, like, for example, if you are in the CBD of Sydney or if you are in the central business district of Sydney, which is Wynyard, I am pretty sure that no one would want to talk to you or like
Sure.
show you direction. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think with New York, it's probably a similar sort of thing where if you are in the business hotspot of New York, then that's the place where they'll probably won't be so nice to you. But yeah, my personal experience with New York was they're really friendly and they do want to start conversation, and I definitely feel as though they are very proud that they come from that city, and it's definitely a really interesting perspective. I mean, I wasn't when I was talking to a New Yorker, I think I was in Central Park, and I was kind of like on the outskirts. Like I was just walking one of the streets,
Mm-hmm.
but I feel as though if you're in, for example, Times Square, those sorts of places, I think that's where you'll find that maybe people aren't so nice. So
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and I think you have to be smart not only about where you're asking people for favors or advice or help or whatever, but also just about the places you go. I
yeah.
had I knew somebody from Texas that came up here for a conference not too long ago. It was out in the Chicago suburbs, and I said something about spending a night in Chicago. She says, "I would never go to Chicago. I'm just 100% sure that I would get shot." So in the U.S. media, there's a lot of reports about gun violence and things like that in Chicago, and look, it does happen. But if you're walking in the central business district, or you're walking in the area called the Gold Coast, it's just north of the central business district. It's kind of a wealthier part of town. If you're in those areas, you're completely safe, like 24 hours a day. There's certain parts of Chicago that I wouldn't go into at all, and there's certain parts I wouldn't go into at certain times of the day. That's just me,
No.
but part of it is, like I said, you get what you give, but you also have to be smart about where you are in terms of asking people for things, and do they have the time, and second of all, you have to consider your personal safety.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, like, for example, Japan, like I said, I think a lot of my temperament does come from Japan, but in the area that I lived, it was an basically a retirement village. So many of the people were old, and the atmosphere was very uh, naturalistic. There was actually like a huge park, I think 10 to 15 minutes near my apartment,
Mm-hmm.
and oh yeah, and like everyone that I came across in my neighborhood were extremely nice, and this was from like the front of house, from the customer service people, all the way down to just the people that were walking about and doing their daily thing. But I've also had experiences in the main city of Tokyo. A few of my like worst experiences actually come from main city Tokyo, especially
Wow.
Shinjuku. Yeah, like it is amazing because I still my friends have heard like some of these stories I are a bit like explicit for the podcast, so it can get pretty bad, and a lot of the people can get pretty rude, but at the same time a lot like still a lot of my experiences with Japanese people is that they are very polite, they are very kind, and they have really great manners that I really took on in my personality. But you definitely have to be aware that if you are in any super touristy spot, or if you are in a very busy area, or even like the party areas, I think it's only natural that the people there are going to be not so nice and not so
Yep.
great. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's like it's no fault of the country, it's no fault of the culture. It is kind of just the way that it is in those sorts of areas. So yeah, but it's cool that we both like the New York people because
Yeah.
I'm definitely for.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And with that being said, what is something important that you've learned while you were traveling?
So, the more I visit different countries and interact with people and ask them all kinds of questions about their culture and all that kind of stuff. Look, we're all fundamentally the same, as human beings. We all want to be loved. We all want to feel that we have purpose and meaning in our lives. We want to do good, but sometimes we fall short of that, and we just need to give ourselves and others some grace. We might speak different languages. We might have cultural traditions that are different, that need to be respected, and they can't be ignored. But fundamentally, when I'm looking or interacting with somebody from, when I'm in Tanzania, or I'm in Japan, or I'm in Greece, or somewhere in the Caribbean, or whatever. Um, I look at that other person as a unique um, gift to the world that has dignity and intrinsic value and worth, and wants to be treated like that. So I think that's my biggest thing is underneath it all, we are really kind of all the same.
Yeah, I mean, it's really fascinating. I think I learned a lot of my. I think what I learned a lot about humans, I learned from being an English teacher, which of course entailed into me learning about a completely different culture, how
Hmm.
they work, and how they are as people. And I definitely agree with you. I mean, yes, people have different. Hello, Jim?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Oh, I see. My microphone has died. Did
Oh,
not know it would do that. But that's all right. So, yes, for me as an English teacher, I really learned that even though we're all brought up differently, like, we're all very different, but we want the same things. Like,
yes.
intrinsically, we want the same thing. So, essentially, when you are communicating with another human, no matter how different they are in personality, in culture, or how they were brought up, at the end of the day, they still ultimately want the same things that you do. And
Yeah.
it's really cool just to learn and find out about that from other cultures. And I definitely think that's a extremely important part of traveling as well, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
So with the really deep stuff aside, do you have, because I know that you've traveled a lot, right?
Yeah.
So in terms of, like, since you are a photographer, what has been your favorite place to travel to in terms of photography? Like, where's your favorite place to take photographs at?
Uh, so if I could shoot one thing for the rest of one subject for the rest of my life, it would be flowers. And I love the variety and the colors and all that kind of stuff. So there's a uh, there's a botanic garden not too far from here, the Chicago Botanic Garden, ironically, which is in a suburb. But anyway, but it's such an amazing place, and I walk in there, I just feel this sense of calm and peace and joy, just like coming out of my pores, because I love the flowers and all that. I would say, beyond that, when I also very much enjoy shooting photographing animals, not shooting them. But well,
True.
yeah, but I would say that going to Africa was amazing. So we were there for 9 days. I shot over 3,000 photos. Now, not all of those are good, but it was like 20 shots of this lion or whatever, and trying to capture the exact right pose and the exact right glint in the eye and stuff like that. But
Yeah.
I love photographing animals. I love capturing their expressions. They're trying to get to the soul of who they are as animals, and what their species represents and all that. So I've done a lot of nature photography in a lot of places, but Africa, hands down, the best place in the world I've ever been for it.
Oh, I mean, what kind of lens do you use actually in terms of like nature photography? Because I have great difficulty in terms of portrait photography or like just capturing a subject rather than like landscapes and stuff like that?
Yeah, so I tend to use longer lenses because when you're out on a safari trip, you're not necessarily up close and personal with the animals. You know, they might be, half a kilometer away from you, and part of that is because they're wary of human beings, and part of that is just because the driver wants to keep you safe. So,
Mm-hmm.
I use a Nikon lens. It's a 75 to 300 millimeter. It's a great lens. It is. I love it. I'm actually looking at upgrading to a 500 millimeter.
Oh,
I'm going to Costa Rica in a few months for a photography conference where we're going to focus on wildlife.
ah,
And there's a lot of birds down there, which I'm fascinated with birds as well,
yeah.
and being able to get those in the trees and all that. So um, for uh, just animals or birds, I would say somewhere between 300 and 500 millimeter lens is a must have. If you're shooting landscapes, kind of the broader picture, maybe somewhere 24 to maybe 35 millimeter focal length. But there are also some, like I said, the lens that I use is or that I use the most. It's a 75 to 50. Not great for landscapes, but you can kind of use it. So it's a good kind of all-purpose lens. And then if I'm going someplace to focus specifically on landscapes, I'll take a wide angle. Like I have a 14 millimeter lens,
Mm-hmm.
which is horrible for getting detail on a single animal. But if you want to capture the broad scope of you know, of I don't know, Haleakala Crater that's in Hawaii, or Badlands National Park in the U.S. at sunrise. If you want to capture that, 14 millimeter wide angle just gets the whole spectrum, of it in for you.
That is awesome. Thank you for
Yeah,
that. And
yeah, you bet.
yeah, and in general, in terms of since you are a travel photographer, do you have a tip in general?
Yeah. So a couple tips. Always make sure your battery's charged.
That's
And always make sure you charge. Take a charger. Yeah, there you. case
a
case
good
in
advice.
point. Exactly. Yeah, yeah. So I think the biggest thing for me is that digital is free. I started again. This is kind of an age thing, but I started shooting back in the days of film,
Mm,
and you pay for the film, you pay for the processing, all that kind of stuff. Whereas digital, I shoot with a Nikon. It's a D610. I can shoot about 7 frames per second, capturing a bird in flight, or whatever. It's free. Like I said, I shot 3,000 photos in Africa. Probably 10% of those were like out of focus, or blurry, or what, like they're just not going to see the light of day. But it doesn't matter. So um, I'm a big believer in just try to capture the shot, and if you get something that's halfway passable, you're going to be happy with it. So um,
yeah.
yeah, and I guess the other thing in terms of photographing animals and plants and all that kind of stuff is read up about the habitat, their habits, what they like. There's certain kinds of birds that nest in trees,
Yeah.
and before they get ready to take off from the tree, they will defecate.
Uh,
And so this is particularly common with eagles. Like we get them a lot in the Midwest during the winter.
mm,
So you go to places, you watch eagles. You always go near a river. You always look for a river with lots of ice because that's where they congregate.
mm.
And when you see an eagle defecate, you know that within 10 seconds he's going to take off. So you just have this amazing shot of the wings just spreading out, and he or she leaping into the air, which you don't know that if you don't know their habits and all that. So just kind
Oh,
of a simple trick, but read
yeah.
up on your subject before you shoot it.
Oh, that is awesome. Yeah, that's true. Like, as I said before, I specialize in landscape photography.
Mhm.
And one thing that I've learned is that for me, landscapes are best taken a photo of during sunrise. And that's like sunny or cloudy sunny,
Yep.
it is amazing. Like, because the light is really soft, like it's not harsh like the sunset where the sun is coming down and for some reason the light is really strong. It really casts a strong shadow, whereas during
Yeah.
sunrise it's rather soft and it there is a shadow, but it's not as harsh. And um I have a few Polaroids of photos that I've taken during the sunrise, and they are like perfect. So maybe it's not so much. I'd imagine that photography, whether digital or analog, would look amazing at sunrise, but it,
Absolutely, and in fact, professionals talk about two different periods. They talk about the blue hour and then the golden hour.
oh,
The blue hour is usually like 90 to 45 minutes, either before sunrise or after sunset, and the sun is below the horizon. You get some really cool tones, some blues, some grays, and all that, and it's just calmness and peacefulness and serenity.
yeah,
And then the golden hour is that um, just as the sun is coming up above the horizon, and maybe the first 20 to 30 minutes. But the light is warm and it's rich and tones of gold and
yeah,
pink and yellows and it's
yeah,
vibrancy and life and stuff like that. So it all depends on what you're trying to capture.
yeah.
But you're absolutely right that those are the two most critical times to be out there shooting landscapes.
Yeah, and like especially in analog form, or especially because Polaroid, I mean, it does cost a lot of money. Like it's not free like digital, but um, just just the finish of it, like when you actually see the picture when it develops. Because with Polaroids, if you don't have a good, or if your subject does not have a good white balance between its light and its shadow, it will just blow out of proportion. So
Sure.
if yeah, so if the sky is too light, then whatever that you're taking in the shade just turns out as black. And then of course, even if you're taking a picture in the shade, you have to make sure to stay still and stuff like that. But when it comes to the sunrise hour, it's perfect. Like it's beautiful because the color balance is really perfect during that
Yep.
time. During the sunrise hour, it's excellent, especially for Polaroid photography. Like,
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, that
And,
was
and and one other thing, just real quick, and I can send you some more information for the show notes. But a lot of cameras support what's called exposure bracketing, so that you can do something called an HDR, or a high dynamic range photo.
mm,
So a camera can only see one opening, or what's called an f-stop. So it can only adjust to one type of light at a time. Your eye can actually do up to 10 different exposures. That's why everything looks normal for you, and then you take a picture and you're like, wow, I can't see this dark stuff at all.
yeah.
So just like the 30-second overview, HDR, or high dynamic range photography, is you take multiple shots, some of them exposing for the dark areas, and then some exposing for the lighter areas in the picture. And then there's software that will take those and stitch them all together, so you get a picture that's a lot more like what your eye sees. Now, of course, you can't do this with analog, but
Um,
with digital, if it's done right, you can get some amazing results for landscapes.
oh, that is amazing. Yeah, definitely. Oh, that is such an excellent tip.
Yeah,
So for any of the travel photographers out there, you heard it first from Mr. Jim Jones. That is seriously excellent advice.
yeah,
I
thank you.
Yeah, I should find that in my cameras. Cause yeah, I mean, I have a micro four thirds camera. I have a DJI Osmo Pocket, but that is more specialized for video rather than photography. But if it has HDR, that would be totally awesome. But that's definitely a trick and tip to remember, especially for landscapes and stuff like that.
Yeah,
Uh,
I actually have a post that I'm writing about HDR, so I'll finish that up by the time this publishes, and then I'll send a link to it for your show notes.
Awesome, yes, and I hope that the guests look forward to that blog post as well, because I know I'll be.
Yeah, great.
So it is nearing to the end of the podcast, but just before we finish, would you like to share your number one travel hack?
Yeah, my number one travel hack. It's actually a very old saying. I'm not the originator of it, but any place you go, take half the clothes and twice the money. I'm a very big believer in packing light. When we went to Tanzania, we could only take 17 kilograms because we have a lot of small planes in the country that we were flying on. So very heavy weight restrictions. So it's things like pack clothes that are nylon or a fabric that's going to dry easily so that you can wash it in a sink and wear it. Then you don't have to have a new shirt every day.
Yeah.
Don't pack 14 pairs of shoes. I think in Tanzania, literally, I think I had one pair of shoes for the entire trip. And just I didn't bring a lot of extraneous stuff. The one thing that I did make sure to make room for in there was things like over the counter or prescription drugs that I needed. I took a broad spectrum antibiotic. I guess it would be my other travel hack. Is always make sure you've got your little traveling first aid kit. Not to be too gross, but like an anti-diarrheal, some sort of anti-inflammatory drug like an ibuprofen or whatever. If you get injured, get your doctor write your prescription for a broad spectrum antibiotic. All these things so that if you do have a small health related issue on the trip, that your trip doesn't get derailed or doesn't get shipwrecked, just because you were sick.
Uh,
So that's kind of a two for there. Pack light, but always pack your OTC and your prescription drugs.
yeah, 100%. Please don't forget your medication or your would be could be medication.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. Like for example, I know that Japan does not sell Panadol. I think it's aspirin. I think
Yep.
or yeah, they have like a different kind of aspirin, but from my experience that aspirin is just not as strong as what I knew in Australia. So when I got a cold or a flu, it was actually really difficult for me to get over that cold and flu for some time because I'm
Yeah.
yeah, so definitely bring your country's medication with you because you really don't know what kind of medication that you'll have in the other country. So thank you for that awesome advice.
You're welcome.
Yeah, so we are now officially at the end of the podcast. If you are currently listening to this only through audio, you can find the visual version or the video version of this as well on YouTube. If you'd like to find the extra contents of what Jim Jones will give to the podcast, because he will share his favorite post as well as his favorite picture. You can find that on the World Begins With You social media. So you can find us through social media, also find us on YouTube. Or if you are a podcast listener, please subscribe because I'd love to see you around. And where can we find you, Jim Jones?
So I am on the web at travelstoriesandimages.com, and my handle is stories and images. That's stories, the letter N, and then the word images, on Pinterest, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. I'm missing one. I don't know, but pretty much any social media that I'm on, my
Instagram.
handle, yeah, my Instagram, yeah, of course, for a photographer, edit that part out. But all of the social media, I'm at Stories and Images, so
Yeah.
that's where you find me.
Yes, awesome. And like I said before, you'll find more of him during his week of his podcast. So I hope that all of you have a wonderful day, and I will see you guys next time on the podcast World Begins With You.